This is Dennis Raimondi with the Coffee League, found at thecoffeeleague.com, where we discuss all things related to coffee. Go to the website, thecoffeeleague.com, and I'm also, when you go there, go to the blogcast. That's my podcast, which is also available now on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, and YouTube. And I just got back. I want to let folks know from Scandinavia, mostly in Sweden, Gothenburg and Stockholm, and also made it down to Copenhagen. For those people who love coffee, it's a must trip, Scandinavia. The dollar's very strong now, and just fabulous cafes and talented baristas and roasters all over. And when I was in Gothenburg, Sweden, one of my favorite places is a place in English that's pronounced Alchemy. And there's a gentleman there from Vietnam, a barista and roaster, Anthony. And he was telling me about a roaster from Norway that I should meet. I should have his coffee, which I did have, actually, and I loved it because they were carrying it at his cafe. And his name is Ivica Cvetanovski. I'm going to let him say it. I'm going to call Ivica Ichi. That's what his friends go by. And he's our guest today. Thank you so very much for coming on the show. And please pronounce your name correctly for our listeners.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Very happy to join you. Ivica Cvetanovski is I believe, the correct pronunciation. It originates from Macedonia and born and raised in Sweden, Gothenburg, where my parents got to. They were actually picked up by Volvo in the early 1960s, where they got the chance to work here. So raised 6 kids, and I'm the second one in line. So. Wow. And the 3 first ones got those quirky names, and then my parents realized that for the 3 next ones they got the proper names, like Alexander, Daniel, Philip. So I'm a bit jealous about that, but I managed to survive so far. So
there you go. Now, my understanding from our discussions, and we talked a few times when I was in Sweden. We met up, had some coffee together. And one of the things that you mentioned to me that stood out was that your background is in math. You went to a university to study math and science. I assume mostly math. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Mostly math and computing science. Yeah, and I majored in computer graphics, real-time computer graphics, and also my second degree was in interaction design.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me ask you then. Those skills you picked up in studying math. Well, first of all, how did you make the transition from science math into coffee? And those skills that you learned in math, or that mathematical thinking, or the training math gave your mind, did that help you in your development as a person in coffee?
I would say so, yes. It's interesting that you touch upon these points because, I'm a, let's say, scientist, or I love nature. I see things in nature in such a way that you could almost replicate those things to go directly into what you do in your daily life. So I would dare to say that there is no particular, let's say, transition into coffee when you apply science, because some of it might be, let's say, pure sense how to do it. But of course, specific theories as such can be directly applied to coffee.
Mm-hmm. And how did you make that? So you finished school, you have a background in math. How did you come upon coffee?
I used to work for for the United Nations Environment Program, and an office based in Norway on the south coast called GRID, or GRID, and their head office headquarters is located in Kenya, Nairobi. Mm-hmm. So there were a few trips that were taken there in respect to specific projects. So during the weekends, me and my good friend, partner Thor here as well, went out to some coffee farms just of pure interest and just to learn more about the general, let's say, subject. So I think call it the journey started there. It could have been about 10, 12 something years ago.
All right, now let me ask you, Ichi, during that period of time, were you a coffee drinker? Were you a coffee lover? Was coffee a part of your life, or was it something very peripheral to your life?
No, it was not. It was as you say, very peripheral. Coffee for me was something that you could maybe have just before midterm exam or when you were writing your thesis and so on. So coffee per se was not, let's say, part of my daily life, not whatsoever. No.
And so when you got there and you were visiting those farms, what was your initial experience like? Was there something that attracted you to coffee? What was your, for those people that have never visited a coffee farm, what was your experience like when you went there for the first time?
Well, first of all, it's you can say that the whole scenario gets a bit reverse engineered, because when you when let's say ordinary average Joe or so would see coffee in whether it's in a coffee shop or if it's in a convenience store, that doesn't translate that well into what you see at origin or at a farm, or what you see in the eyes of a coffee farmer. So it's it might be a bit complex to explain, of course, because you have to be there to understand it, to realize it, to get the whole picture. So one of the most, let's say, disturbing things that we found out was the fact that here in at least in Scandinavia, it's the pricing of things. You might, let's say, pay about between 10 and 15 US dollars for a roasted bag of coffee, while farmers, at least the ones that we were visiting, they earned about 0.6 or 7 US dollars per kilo of their coffee. So there's a huge disturbance that we just faced on location. We immediately felt that we should be able to contribute to at some level, at least.
Now, at the time, you were working for United Nations organization or some organization associated with the United Nations. Now, that price differential between what it's selling for and what the farmer is getting, was there price gouging? Were there middle people, men or women or whatever, that was causing that to happen? Because often we explain to people, hey, look, if you want a really good cup of specialty coffee, you got to pay a reasonable amount of money. You think it's expensive, but there's a lot that happens between the ground and the cup you're receiving that creates that expense. What did you see that could be done at that time to make the distribution of the money that comes from coffee more fair, more equitable for everybody involved?
What I would dare to say, immediately saw was the need for you can express it as a form of capacity development or increase of knowledge. The farmers, they didn't know the fact how much their coffee was actually being sold at when the product was already made, what you would find in a coffee cup or a coffee shop. So that was the first, right? For them to understand that their very product that they're working on a basically daily basis was had a specific value attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
That no one had ever told them. This was by the way, in Kenya, Meru. So no one had actually told them what their green beans were actually worth.
Mm-hmm.
So we started to work on that first. Then, in addition, we started to contact some of the, let's say, major roasteries that were around by that time. No particular specialty coffee roasters, because there were less of them then than there is now. But some we did contact, and the intention was to connect them directly to the farmers.
Mm-hmm.
However, we were received in a, let's say, I don't seem to find the word at this moment, but it's not like we were all welcome.
You were not all welcome by whom?
Well, as I mentioned, not to mention any names, but they are pretty, let's say, profound these days in respect to Norway and Sweden, and we visited them personally, told our story, and asked kindly, "Is there something that we can work on
now,
together?"
These are when you say you spoke to these people, these are the people that were buying from the farms. Is that right?
Well, maybe not from those farmers in
but
particular, but I would, exactly.
Now, here's a question I have, and again, and I remind our listeners, I'm no expert in coffee, but I'm a journalist that has been exploring and studying coffee, and I've learned a lot, but I have a lot more to learn. And somebody like Ichi we have on now has infinitely more knowledge about coffee than I do. But my question is, I know I'm in America now. You're in Sweden. Wherever people go to consume, they'll often they'll look for the word fair trade. Is this fair trade? But my understanding from speaking to people in the industry, like yourself, is that forget about fair trade. If you want to make sure the farmer's taken care of, it's important that the people sourcing those beans go to the farm, have a direct relationship, know what's going on there, so on and so forth. Am I accurate in what I'm saying, and what is your experience with that?
Yeah, I would say that that's a pretty accurate observation. Yes, because to be able to have a sense of the word fair, you have to put it in some kind of context, right? Because you personally, you would not walk into a hair salon and get a fair haircut.
Right.
You would ask for a good or a great haircut.
Right.
So why is that not possible? You know, and for coffee, which is one of the greatest or one of the most traded good in all the world, you cannot do that. You know, and we have to apply some kind of certificate or have a stamp or have an emblem of a coffee bag to be able to persuade a consumer that this is the case.
But you're saying that if it says fair trade, that's not necessarily reflecting that there's fair trade.
Well, are we able to call the coffee farmer? Are we able to ask them how much they were paid?
Right.
No, we're not.
Right. So then, and by the way, I want to mention to our listeners that Ichi is the founder and owner of Coffea, Coffea Circulor, Circulor. I'll have all this posted up. Fantastic coffee. I've had it. I recommend it. And we'll put up all that information if you want to go to your local cafe and say, hey, look, can you get some of this? But so you go back and you go to Norway and you set up a business. Now, how are you doing business, or when you started especially, that was different from other roasters in terms of sourcing and all this? So you went to Africa, you got this knowledge, you got this insight, you spoke to some people in the industry, and then you go into the business yourself. How did you apply those concerns and principles that you were developing at that time?
We were some years ago, as you might know, the UN set up the Millennium Development Goals. They have now transitioned into the so-called SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So back then we tried to map those Millennium Goals into how we can set up a open trade mechanism towards towards coffee farmers. So our call it wasn't even intended to be a business. Our ambition was to connect the let's say greenhouse green bean buyers at the big firms that do this on a daily basis, also minor roasteries and so on. And when we realized that there was lack of interest, and I have to be clear on this, because we didn't want to have any, let's say, part of any cut or so. It was just, here you go, here's the phone number to the farmer. I don't know, maybe it all did sound sketchy to the people back then, because they might have thought, who are you guys? Are you, we were nobody, and we might have come across as being nobody as well,
right.
So obviously, it had to turn into a business or a business model, simply because in order to be able to buy coffee from Africa, or Kenya in this case, we also had to set up a branch of the company in Kenya, and also in Norway. So with, let's say, no particular intention about how to move forth, what we wanted to do for ourselves as a hobby was to buy the coffee, roast it for ourselves, and I believe the first from the very beginning we got about 600-700 kilos of coffee that we just distributed to friends, so that's the say story of our origin.
But let me ask you along those lines. You've developed into a world-class coffee roaster, and you've been in major competitions. You've been a judge, and I believe the gentleman, your partner in the business, also world-class skills as well. When did that happen, and how did that happen? Was it something you immediately took to, or is it something that you fell into? But how did you develop that high level of skill?
There is no, let's say, textbook example of how you can do things in this particular area, I would say. I mean, of course, now or today, surely there are dozens of books that could describe, also blogs, and, we have the digital media, so also known as social media and so on. People are likely more to be connected today than they were, let's say, 10 years ago. So for me personally, I would say that it's trial and error, learning by doing, and applying, as we initially stated here from the beginning, that math and science does have a specific impact on how you do things. You have to think about thermal dynamics, pressure in a roaster, what actually happens to a bean, what kind of origin a bean has, how do we make sure that we preserve and also conserve the particular flavors that are associated to this, let's say, green bean at origin. Because you can take a coffee berry and just chew on it, and you would find specific nuances of something that is very inherent for that particular bean. So my goal has always been to try to reflect that and put it into a final cup of coffee. Some, let's say, particular elements of these are very difficult to sustain, such as volatile components, as floral flavors. Those are very difficult to preserve. But there are tricks that can enable you to do that. Again, I would dare to say, you will never be a Jedi master in this area. Learning by doing.
And then so this is happening. You're developing this skill. You're understanding the big picture of a business and how it can be done more fairly. And at what point did you develop a passion for the actual consumption of coffee? How did your coffee taste change, and how did that fit into it? Or is coffee something you like to work with, but not necessarily something you drink so much?
I think it's a mixture of both these two elements or compounds. I do enjoy coffee. I really do. Of course, more than I did before our journey began in this area. I try to think graphically. I try to imagine things graphically, and also in colors. How does a specific flavor reflect particularly? Can I match it onto or map it onto something? Can I map it onto an emotion? Can I map it onto a specific happening or a memory? And so on, and I think that's what also coffee does on a general level for people. Usually, I would dare to argue that if people sit down in a coffee shop, I wouldn't say that they are discussing the cup of coffee unless you are in the coffee business, but they're connecting with some means of happenings in life. What's going on in your life? What's going on in my life? And then you create a memory out of that one. You package it into a solid piece of memory that you can just carry along with you for quite some time.
What are your what's a typical day in terms of your coffee consumption?
Well, to be honest, I try not to drink coffee on a daily basis, unless simply because that you are subjected to it at that let's say level, that in order to keep your palate balanced, it's also important to just have a ordinary glass of tap water, if you will, and especially when you delve into more intense say coffee drinking periods, such as preparing for competitions, whether they're on local, national, or international level. It does get a bit almost too much, because it's also important to state that if you find a really memorable, tasty, colorful, mesmerizing cup of coffee, try to keep somehow your distance, because don't overconsume it, because range it out a bit.
It's like the guy that works in a pastry shop and he loves a particular pastry, and then he starts eating it every day, and then he can't look at it anymore. So I understand. And by the way, I want to mention your partner in the business. You are in 2014 was the Norwegian coffee roasting champion, and your partner Thor was champion, I think, in 2013. So what is your association when you are roasting coffee, when you're developing whatever blends or single origins that you're getting and sourcing and roasting? Do you guys do separately, or do you collaborate on everything?
We do collaborate on these matters, and of the simple fact that coffee and the actual roasting process should stay consistent throughout a particular coffee's lifespan, right?
Hmm.
However, we do experiment a lot as well, and I think that's what brings out those particular other frequencies, if you will, that might create some interesting other type of
Hmm.
experiences as well.
Right. I have a question for you, and you might be the best person I know to answer this question. Uh, one of the things I'm very interested in addition to coffee, is the coffee culture, the culture that grows up around coffee, and it's different from country to country. Uh, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, three places that are very rich
Mhm,
in
mhm.
coffee and tremendous cafes. Is there any difference in the culture from Norway to Sweden and coffee in terms of what the cafes are like and how people consume their coffee? I know in Sweden you have fika and all, but is there a difference, or are they pretty much the same?
Um, if you let me just think about that for 2 seconds,
Yeah.
it would be, I would dare to say that it's quite similar. The
Mm.
Scandinavian way of consuming coffee, let's say broadly on a general
Hmm.
level, is that you have a sit down. It's the complete opposite set of what you would find more towards the Mediterranean
Right.
countries. You know,
Right.
if you walk into a coffee bar in, for example, Italy, you order un café, and which is what we know here as a espresso, and you're essentially standing up. You you drink it in one shot, and then you're off. But here is it's a more social happening, gathering atmosphere around it.
Hmm.
Because if you would do that if you would do it, call it the Italian style in Sweden, you might be frowned upon, or you
Right.
might be
Right.
looked upon it. What happened? This guy
Right.
just disappeared throughout the door. Wasn't the
Right.
coffee good, or what
Right,
happened?
right, right. Well, I love that and I've been to all three of those countries where you actually sit down. You're not getting a coffee to go. You're getting it. You're sitting down. One difference might be in Norway, they don't always have a pastry or bun, but in Sweden they always have, some sort of bun with their coffee. But you sit down, you talk, you chat, and it's a beautiful experience. Every culture, the way the Italians do it, for them, that's what they enjoy. And in the States, where I am now. People will often go into a coffee shop, bring their computer, have a cup of coffee, and just want to be left alone, which is another. And in every area, there's overlap. As a matter of fact, I was in Minneapolis recently, which is really developing their coffee scene quite a bit. And the guys that developed, there was one cafe in particular I really liked, and they said by the coffee bar where you get the coffee, and in the area right around there, they have no electrical outlets because they want the people in that area to actually sit, enjoy the coffee, chat, and then in the periphery, the perimeter of the cafe, they have some places to sit, and that's where they have their outlets. So if people are working on computers, that so they've managed to segregate the different groups, and I think it continues to evolve, but it's fascinating because I think coffee, wherever it is, creates its own culture. We
Mm.
have a million more things. We have to have you back on the show because I have lots more questions for you, and I want to talk at some point next time maybe about the founding of your. You have a great story about how you were roasting on an island with a lighthouse, and that's something we'll save for another show. But for our listeners, go to CoffeaCirculor.com. That's Ichi's website for Coffee Circular. And like I said, I mean, I go to a lot of cafes, and I don't come on the show and promote anything unless I've had it and really enjoy it. And they make great coffee. This is world class stuff, and I highly recommend it. And
Thank
any
you.
final words?
Thank
And
you.
we'll have all this posted up on the website and the blogcast podcast. Any final words you'd like to share with our listeners, Ichi?
No, I'm very grateful to be part of the show. Really, I mean, it's coffee and also this is a multi-layered organism, if you will. I mean, everything ranging from, it all begins from nature, right? I mean, if there is no nature, there's no coffee trees. If there is no coffee tree, there are no coffee drinkers, and so on. And there would not exist any roasters. There would not exist any particular other people as well, you know. And the more you start to peel off these specific layers, you start to delve into details that are really fascinating. And I think that each and every person is contributing with their part. And but most importantly, I have to say that we all carry a specific responsibility in what we're doing, and also the decisions we take in life in respect to buying coffee, consuming coffee, and so on. So I hope that everyone out there is can contribute as well with their feelings, emotions, and spread the knowledge about what everyone is doing in the industry.
Thank you, fantastic. And again, if anybody has a chance to go to Scandinavia, contact me directly. And actually, on my website, I recommend different cafes in different countries, places almost always I've been to or have come highly recommended to me. Maybe someday I'll put a coffee tour of Scandinavia together. People have been asking me about that. So in any event, Ichi, thank you so very much for your time. This
Thank you.
Won't be the last time you're on the show, because I just felt like we scratched the surface, much more to discuss. But
yeah, first layer.
This is the first layer. We'll go from here. Till next time, folks. Enjoy your coffee, and please email me, contact me if you have any questions. Always happy to give you advice, or get somebody who knows a lot more than me to get advice to you. So, Ichi, thanks again.
Thank you.